Good afternoon and welcome to the special presentation on DD India. G20 Leaders Summit is underway in Johannesburg, South Africa. Prime Minister Narendra Modi is representing India. It's a two-day summit. Today is the final day. Prime Minister is engaged in multiple sessions. He also had key bilateral engagements with leaders from the participating country. In the next couple of hours or so, we'll bring you up to speed with all the latest updates from Johannesburg, South Africa. Let's begin. So, Prime Minister Modi, who is on a visit to Johannesburg, South Africa for the G20 summit, is at the moment participating in the third session or summit today. Prime Minister will speak on the theme is a fair and a just future for all, critical minerals, decent work, artificial intelligence. That's the third and the final session of the summit. And earlier, Prime Minister Modi participated in the sixth IBSA summit, that's India, Brazil, South Africa summit, the trilateral forum comprising India, Brazil and South Africa. On the sidelines of the G20 summit, discussions were held on enhancing cooperation between the three countries in various fields. This trilateral forum is a major step towards bringing the three major countries of Asia, South America and Africa closer together for cooperation. Prime Minister Narendra Modi also held bilateral meeting with South African President Cyril Ramaphosa in Johannesburg on the sidelines of the G20 summit. The meeting underscored the long-standing friendship between India and South Africa, reaffirmed their common commitment to deepening cooperation across multiple sectors. Both leaders reviewed the current state of mutual and international relations, expressing satisfaction over the progress made in areas such as trade, investment, defense, collaboration and cultural exchange. They emphasized the importance of strengthening strategic partnership to address emerging global challenges collectively, reaffirming their shared vision. Both Prime Minister Modi and President Ramaphosa committed to further enhancing bilateral ties and exploring new avenues for collaboration. Prime Minister Modi had an interaction with the Prime Minister of Jamaica, Andrew Holness, during the G20 summit in Johannesburg. Prime Minister Modi highlighted that India and Jamaica are bound by historical friendship, enriched by cultural linkages. Prime Minister also said partnership between the two nations continues to grow with deep commitment to collective progress. And to take forward our conversation on Prime Minister Narendra Modi's visit to South Africa, Johannesburg, to attend the G20 summit and several key bilaterals, let me welcome Ambassador Manju Seth, former senior diplomat. We'll also be connecting to our correspondent Amritpal Singh, who is live from Johannesburg in just a bit. Ambassador Manju Seth, good afternoon and welcome, ma'am. Second and final day of the G20 summit. First, your overview on the outcomes that we've seen so far from the 20th G20.
I think overall it is a very positive outcome and a positive declaration. But yes, as the US was not present, they've been objecting to the various some of the items, saying that we were not on board. But overall, I think it has a very positive outcome. The declaration highlights the importance of G20. But I think the shift is towards the developing world, and I think this is may not be very welcome to the developed world. But I think the focus being on development, on energy transition, though COP30 is also looking at energy transition and financing. But the fact that G20 countries are also focusing on this, the declaration has been adopted, and they have highlighted the fact that, and our Prime Minister has also highlighted the fact that Africa's development and skilling and its participation in the global world economy is very, very important for global progress, because I think it holds many key resources, key elements when I say resources, it's both human and material resources. And skilling is important in South Africa. So there's also a focus on the circularity of critical minerals to recycle and see how they can be reused. And also, if you look at one of the main economic factors or the economic issues that is there is that how to make the world economy, better, more resilient, supply chains more resilient, trade and investments more smooth. So all these aspects are very important, and I think they are a pointer to the fact that the G20 initiatives that India took when it was during its presidency, and further built on by Brazil and now by the South African presidency, are all important and all essential for today's world, in today's uncertain and difficult churn that is going on in world geopolitics, geoeconomics. And I think the way forward that has been shown by the G20 declaration is that if it's implemented, even in part, I think it will be a positive thing for the world economy.
Right, ma'am. Just to build on that point, and going back to India's presidency of the G20 in 2023, the kind of focus that was put on the priorities of the Global South, the voice of the Global South, the African Union also for the first time became a part of the G20, and now for the first time a G20 taking place in South Africa. How do you also see this momentum that India had created as far as priorities of the Global South are concerned? That momentum has been consistently taken forward. You mentioned Brazil and now here in Johannesburg.
Absolutely, because I think for far too long the world had become sort of divided, and the focus was on the development of the developed countries, or on their interests mainly. And it's high, and India put the focus on the Global South, saying that it is important for both sides, for both the North and the South to develop. Then only will you be able to get a just and equitable world. And I think there will be only progress, and there is a lot of interdependency between countries in today's globalized world. You cannot, be isolating yourself in any way and only have a one-way kind of, should I say, an exploitative kind of approach to partnerships and to. I think that has changed, and is not changed really, but is on the way to being changed, where the Western countries are also realizing that the partnership needs to be a little more mutually beneficial, and they are looking at that, and I think that is a plus point. And the G20 under India's presidency put a focus on that the multilateral organizations, the Bretton Woods organizations, all need to be restructured to be representative of the views and the needs of the Global South. And I think that is an important change which started then, and as I said, continued by Brazil, and now renewed and further focused on at the current summit. So I think that is it was inevitable, and we could not. And I think the world has understood that we cannot continue to ignore Africa and continue to ignore the development of the Global South if the Global North also, wants to develop and progress.
Right. Ambassador Seth, you mentioned in your intervention that the leaders' declaration is forward-looking, has a lot of positives for the Global South in particular. We also understand that G20 was also supposed to, in a way, bridge the gap between Global North and Global South. America's absence, President Donald Trump's boycott, what is the implication then for the outcome? I mean, then other priorities that have been discussed, that have been penned down on paper, does the value changes because the leader of one of the most powerful countries is absent from the gathering, and who's also going to be the next chair, which makes it even more important, ma'am?
Absolutely. I think it is unfortunate that the US has not been represented at all. Just a junior embassy representative. I think that is not really, not really right, should I say. It's for the US to decide what is right for it or not. But I do believe if they had at least sent, if not the president himself, I think it is important it was important for the US. It is important for the US to, it's one of the main it's the main countries in the G7. It was one of the main countries. It is one of the main countries in G7. And as you said, in G20 as well, because it is the number one power at the moment. And of course, despite all the churn that is taking place and the rebalancing that is taking place in the world order, despite that, I do believe that if there had been at least a ministerial level, representation from the US, and they had contributed to this declaration, I think and given that the chair, the presidency is going to pass on to the US, I think it would have been in the fitness of things for the US to be present. Okay, if not at the president's level, but definitely at the minister's level, representing the president and giving their inputs. I think inputs and their agreement to the declaration. Now, but that is totally lacking, and so we don't know how effective it will be in implementing this. How easy it would be to implement this declaration in all its whatever is being decided on. If the US is going to keep out of it. I do believe that since it is going to be the next president, it's going to take on the next presidency after this, there might be, as is the nature of President Trump, to radically rewrite and radically change the agenda. So we don't know where it's going to head after this. And I think there was also, I read somewhere that the South African president said, I will not hand over the presidency to a junior representative in the embassy. Which is also not, which is also the right thing, because you have to have when you hand over the presidency, it has to be done in a particular manner.
Right. I was just coming to, ma'am, the technicality of it. I mean, we'll get to know in a couple of hours or so how this presidency will transfer from South Africa to the US. But is there precedent as to how that very traditional gavel being handed over to the next leader will happen?
Always been leader to leader, I think. So I don't think normally, I don't recall any such incident either in the G20 or other organizations where this kind of situation has arisen. But I hope that they will find an amicable solution and it's handed over in the right spirit and at the right level. And the US is, ready to take on the responsibility of giving the G20 the right momentum and the right direction when it takes on its presidency, and carrying on with many of the areas and many of the things agreed to and stated in this particular declaration. But I think that remains to be seen how it pans out and what happens.
Right. Ambassador Seth, let's now talk about what India has brought into the G20, this edition in particular, as Prime Minister Narendra Modi is engaged in several sessions. On day one, he sends out the message of integral humanism, of the civilizational values of India, at a time when we see growing protectionism, countries trying to protect their interests. Sometimes the interest of the planet is outside of national interest, as we see what's happening at COP30. How do you see this message of integral humanism being significant, not just for the G20, but for the world at large at the moment?
Absolutely. It's, it's very important that development, along with a degree of, with the human touch, and with keeping in mind humanity in general, and the human good, the global human good. I think given that, how AI and other new technologies are developing so rapidly and in quite an uncontrolled manner, as well as the general traditional development is going on, keeping humans aside. And the climate change, as we can see, has caused untold harm and damage and destruction across the world. Fires, hurricanes, cyclones, floods, landslides. Every possible natural disaster has taken place, has occurred across the world, and so humans have not been kept at the heart of development. So I think it is important to refocus on that, and Prime Minister's focus on integral humanism and integrating it into development, I think, is an important reminder to all world leaders and to everybody that this should not be set aside. And I think we need to look at it with renewed focus and with renewed each country, G20, and even outside the G20, the ones who are now in the development phase and who are looking to development models from other countries. It's important for them also to look at this aspect, to keep humans and humanity at the center of development.
And Prime Minister also expands on that idea. The number of initiatives that he has proposed at the G20 from India's side, taking forward that idea of integral humanism, global traditional knowledge repository. In many ways, it reflects on the focus on multilateralism as well, taking everyone's wisdom together. Whoever can solve whichever problem in a better manner, others can learn. How do you see the initiatives that Prime Minister has proposed at the G20, ma'am, beginning with Global Traditional Knowledge Repository?
Yes, I think over the years, given that the focus has been on science, and ignored traditional knowledge in different countries, each country has, including India, Africa, and other countries as well, have a huge repository of traditional knowledge, not only and for medicine, of course. Traditional medicine has been discussed in previous years, but traditional knowledge, is very important, and to take it out, to regain it, is important, so that we can look at how our forefathers, how the traditional, how they handled, how they approached different, whether it was disasters or whether it was health or treatment, etc. All these, and living in harmony with nature. So I think all these ideas and all these aspects and this knowledge needs to be got back, studied, and got back into the mainstream, and create a kind of, as mentioned, a repository which can be accessed by anybody, and for research purposes and for utilization. Because there are some areas where humans, the current scientific research has not had a chance to, I think, be at that level. And this, the traditional knowledge, when we look at some of it, they approach, especially in health, if you see traditional knowledge and traditional medicine, looks at the core reason for a particular ailment, and to treat the core. Whereas modern medicine seems to be looking more at as a palliative and putting and not really addressing the core issue or the core reason of any particular ailment or disease. So I think that once you have a repository, researchers and scientists will be able to look at that and see how to integrate both modern and traditional knowledge, modern and traditional medicine, and come out with best practices and the best approach to various concerns, various challenges.
Right. When we look at the venue once again, Johannesburg, South Africa, Africa for the first time hosting the G20, and look at the declaration by the leaders in the outcome statement. There is a significant focus on how the priorities of the Global South, particularly of Africa, appear to be addressed. Prime Minister, in his initiatives that he has announced, also looks at Africa. Africa Skills Multiplier Program is one such initiative. We know that one of the ways in which India's development partnership plays out with different countries in the developing world is through capacity building. And here, Prime Minister, in a very organized manner, talks about Africa Skills Multiplier Program. Train the trainer so that that reach and the spread of knowledge and skills can happen at a faster rate.
Absolutely. I think you, as very rightly pointed out by you, India has had a long history of development partnership with different countries, including with Africa. And while we have been training individuals, we've also been training trainers.
Yes.
But with a renewed, as mentioned by the Prime Minister, we need to do it on a larger scale. Skilling is required. And since it's not possible to, for all individuals to be skilled together, if the trainers are skilled, then they pass on, more to the others. And so it's a kind of multiplier effect, and it's much more quicker. So you skill 10 trainers and they train another 10 each. So, it's much quicker that way. The spread And skilling is so important in today's world, and different skills are required. It's not just literacy. It is multiple areas in across the board, whether it is in science and technology, space, IT, AI. All kinds of areas are there which need skilling, and where the G20 countries have their strengths, and they can help to pass on these to the African countries and to the African nations and to other developing countries as well, I believe, so that with Africa, we begin with Africa, but everybody else in Latin America and other countries, everywhere it gets implemented, so that we have, when we talk of the youth and the youth being the future, etc., it is important that we have a skilled young workforce. And when I say workforce, not necessarily working in factories, but whatever work, but even if they set up their own startups or their own work, own small businesses, I think it is important that skilling, that they be skilled, the skills be provided, and skilling of trainers or training of trainers is a very important aspect of this initiative.
Right, and when Prime Minister presents a number of Africa-centric initiatives, do you also see this G20 gathering becomes an occasion, a platform to enhance India-Africa solidarity, from what we talked about earlier of inviting the African Union to be part of this grouping, to also taking forward that civilizational link that India has always celebrated with the continent as a whole?
Absolutely, and I think the focus on Africa, while it started at India's during India's presidency, it's been there always, but I think it was given a renewed focus. And as I said earlier, the world was looking at Africa from a different perspective, and that has changed with Africa coming into the G20. And the perspectives about themselves, their perceptions about themselves has also changed. We see a little more confidence in African voices, and the fact that they want to be heard, and they want to contribute to global development and global initiatives in a meaningful manner. I think that is visible in this particular G20. And I think if you look ahead, the developed world is also cognizant of this fact, that how important it is to have Africa, and that is why it was, the AU was made a member of the G20. And I think it's only going, the mutual interaction with a certain degree of, equivalence is a very positive thing, which has been long, overdue. It should have happened many years ago. But anyway, whenever it has happened, and with this particular G20, it has got a further cementing, let me say, of this initiative.
Right, ma'am. As we come towards the conclusion of our conversation, ma'am, how do you also assess how the G20 grouping as a whole, how India's leadership has articulated the key headwinds facing the world? There is one particular aspect which is about inequality that is echoed through the statement, also through the initiatives that Prime Minister Modi has announced. How realistically has this been assessed? I also ask this question in the context of, if I may say, a certain disappointing outcome of the COP30 summit, where the world appeared as divided as ever. So in such a context, how does G20 articulate a way forward?
I think inequalities are not going to go away overnight. It's not possible for them, for inequalities, but we should at least address them, take cognizance of them, and that's what the G20 has done. The first thing is to acknowledge that these inequalities exist, and then to address them and to go about making, as you said, bridging the North and the South divide, though it has already become much less than it used to be. But I think what G20 can do, since it brings the biggest 20 economies together of the developed and developing world, it is an important step to acknowledge and recognize that these inequalities exist, and then how to do away and how to address these inequalities together. And that is the important outcome of this summit, that it has been acknowledged, and that they have agreed to work together to make the bridging possible, and to take everyone along. I think that, as India's Prime Minister also said, Vasudev Kutumbakam is part of our ethos, and then we would like everyone to follow that, because if everybody develops together, the world develops together, and there is more peace and prosperity.
On that note, Ambassador Manju Seth, thank you very much for joining us in this special presentation and sharing your insights. This is a special presentation on Prime Minister Narendra Modi's visit to Johannesburg, South Africa. The program in focus is the G20 summit, two-day G20 summit, Leaders Summit. It started yesterday. Today is the final day. Prime Minister termed the Saturday's proceeding at the G20 summit in Johannesburg as fruitful. In a social media post, Prime Minister Modi informed about attending 2 sessions and sharing his views on key issues. He also informed about productive meetings with many world leaders. There were bilaterals. He also shared a small video showing the highlights of the day on Saturday. Those were some glimpses of the highlights of Prime Minister's engagement on Saturday, day 1 of the G20 Leaders Summit. Let's now go across live to Johannesburg. DD India correspondent, my colleague Amritpal Singh, is joining us live with more. Amrit, good evening from Delhi. If you could first bring us up to speed with what is happening at the moment. Prime Minister has participated in multiple sessions at the G20. There have been bilaterals as well. Just fill us in with what's happening at the moment.
Okay, right now the bilateral meetings are going on. These are pull-aside meetings that the Prime Minister is hosting with world leaders. He's just met the Prime Minister of Netherlands. Earlier he met the Prime Minister of Netherlands. He met the Prime Minister of Jamaica. Earlier in the morning he met with the President of South Africa, Cyril Ramaphosa. He's participated in the IBSA meeting. That's India, Brazil, South Africa, where President Lula, President Ramaphosa and Prime Minister Modi were there. He also participated in a session and made an intervention in a session. That was the third session of the G20 and the first on day 2 on critical minerals, the future of work, looking at the equal opportunities of work for all people all around. And so this is what's been transpiring here. A series of bilateral meetings are going on, Shivendu.
Okay, Amrit, we understand every G20 edition takes place in the backdrop of unique economic and geopolitical context. Could you give us a sense of the mood as far as this G20 is concerned and the kind of direction that it is giving to the grouping?
अभी मेरे पे ही है.
Hi Amrit, am I audible?
Phone कट गया.
All right, we're trying to connect with our correspondent Amritpal Singh, joining us from Johannesburg, South Africa. He gave us some details as to what is happening at the moment. Prime Minister is engaged in a number of bilateral engagements at the moment. There's also the final session of the G20. There would be the handover ceremony of the G20 from one presidency to another. That would be interesting to watch out because the next leader of the G20, that is the United States, happens to be absent as far as the gathering is concerned. Let's take forward this conversation with a special guest, Ambassador Rajiv Kumar Bhatia, former Indian High Commissioner to South Africa, is now joining us live. Ambassador Bhatia, good evening and welcome again. Sir, we had a conversation ahead of the beginning of the G20 summit. Now that much is known about the direction in which the leaders have been thinking, the declaration is also out. What is your sense of what has been achieved in this edition of the G20?
I think we can look at this from probably three primary angles. First is the leaders' declaration, which was adopted as soon as the summit began. Second, the speeches made by the leaders and the kind of conversations they are having with the other leaders. And the third is in terms of the meetings on the sidelines which have been taking place. So if we were to take a holistic picture, I think two or three impressions come to my mind very clearly. First, the continuity of ideas and perspectives and decisions that South Africa has inspired and advanced. The continuity with the previous three presidencies is quite obvious. And I think Indian officials seem to be very happy and content that many of the ideas that India pushed at the New Delhi summit have been accepted, taken forward, further developed, and they remain key elements of the G20 philosophy. The second aspect in terms of the meetings and conversations, I think they all look quite positive sounding to me because, even though there are certain dark clouds hovering on the summit, the participants, treated this as a full-scale, proper summit, the last summit in the first cycle, and they did not hesitate to reaffirm or even take new decisions on the key issues of climate change, debt sustainability, disaster response, and many other issues. And on the third aspect, I think it's very significant from the Indian point of view that a number of bilateral or trilateral meetings have taken place, which will really advance the cause of India's foreign policy. While we will go into detail later, but I can flag them saying that the trilateral with Australia and Canada is very significant. The bilateral with the UK was very important. And the IPSA summit, which has taken place as well. So in overall terms, I would say this is a good summit and it is an advancement on what the Global South is trying to do.
Right. We'll take forward this conversation, sir. Let me also welcome Professor Harshvardhan Pant, Vice President, Observer Research Foundation, ORF. Good evening and welcome, sir. Also, my colleague Amritpal Singh is joining us live from Johannesburg. Amrit, we lost you earlier for a moment. I was asking a question about if you can give us a sense of the mood at the G20. Every G20 takes place in the context of unique economic, geopolitical challenges. This year it was no different, but America being absent from the proceedings, what was the mood like that you witnessed at the G20?
Well, America being absent or not participating, choosing to stay out of this year's G20 is the most talked about thing here in amongst journalists, amongst the think tanks who have gathered here, the academia, etc. These questions were being raised about whether that will cast a shadow on the G20. Questions are now being raised because US is going to will take over the presidency. Generally, the tradition is that the outgoing presidency hands over the baton to the incumbent, but hey, with the US choosing to sit out, they only were ready to send their charge d'affaires to South Africa. They don't even have a full ambassador here to take charge, but I think Cyril Ramaphosa had a problem with them. He wanted it at a higher level. So there is a lot of speculation. Will it be given symbolically to an empty chair? Will that happen at all? Their foreign minister a little while back said, the South African foreign minister, that if US doesn't care to take over the presidency, then South Africa is not worried. Though, I mean, it doesn't really translate to the US pulling out of G20 or weakening the grouping. But yes, it's raised a protocol question. But also, the leaders' declaration that was adopted yesterday did point to the fact that even without the US's participation, there were other Western leaders who participated, like Keir Starmer, Giorgia Meloni, Emmanuel Macron, Erdogan, and leaders from around the world. Of course, Prime Minister Modi. So all that, so the adoption of the G20 leaders' declaration clearly signified that the world moves on. They haven't been able to bring it to a screeching halt. There were also talks about Xi Jinping not being here, Vladimir Putin not being here, Donald Trump not being here. Will G20 2025 be of much relevance? But clearly, what we saw in the adoption of the G20 leaders' declaration, there is a continuity of keeping factoring in the concerns, the aspirations, and issues that matter to the global South in the outcome document, taking it further from what was agreed upon at Bali, New Delhi, Rio, and Johannesburg, taking it further. But now the presidency moves to the global North next year. But global South has been able to put its stamp on the declaration very clearly. So all that does point to the fact that and the presence of a lot of African leaders, which President Cyril Ramaphosa has invited to the conference, does augur well for the summit, in a sense keeping the continuity from the past 4 years of its agenda, of its priorities, and being steadfast on that track.
Right. Amrit, stay with us. Professor Harshvardhan Pant, the expectations were very high from Johannesburg G20, given that it's the fourth time a Global South nation was hosting the G20. Would you say the expectations have met the outcome of whatever we've seen so far?
I think, yes, indeed, it seems to have done much more than perhaps was being envisaged at the beginning, primarily because of what Amrit was mentioning earlier, that there was a concern about the future viability of this whole G20 enterprise, especially that Americans have not been very keen on broader multilateralism, but also in particular their spat with South Africa, which led to their not participating at the leader level, Donald Trump's absence. That I think in some ways cast a shadow, and there was the expectations therefore were being leveled in some ways that look, this may not be very productive, but I think South Africa has managed to do very well given the circumstances, and I think India has managed to convey and take forward its message of not only keeping Global South at the core of its multilateral agenda, but also in some ways engaging. And the kind of trilaterals and bilaterals that we saw India engaging in also underscored India's unique role that in global politics at this juncture, where India was sitting with IPSA members on the one side, and then charting out a tech partnership with Canadians and Australians on the other. So I do think that this allowed, in some ways, India to project its very central role in emerging geopolitics, and G20 managed to salvage itself to some degree by focusing on the issues that matter to a large part of the world, which are continuously being ignored. So clearly, the continuation of the trend that we have seen in the last few years of developing countries taking the onus of multilateralism, putting forth the agenda for the global South, that continued under South African leadership, and hopefully, in some ways, that agenda should continue also, although the expectations would be very, very low under Trump administration. But I think the message certainly has gone out that without the developing world, without their concerns being at the heart of the global multilateral agenda, we may not see a significant degree of movement on global issues. And in the agenda, the way it was crafted, seems to underline their core concerns and seems to have taken that forward as had happened in the last few G20 summits. So I think now it is all up to the US how it takes it forward. But clearly, the world has sent a signal that even if US is not interested, multilateralism and global multilateralism will evolve and will have a dynamic of its own, and global and the developing world will continue to be at the heart of these conversations.
Right. We'll talk about the role of the US in just a bit, Professor Pant. Ambassador Rajiv Bhatia, we saw in India's presidency of the G20 in 2023, the evolution as a voice of the global South. When you talk about the continuation of ideas from one G20 to another, how do you also see India, Prime Minister Modi, articulating the key needs of the global South, in many cases of Africa in particular, in the initiatives that he has proposed, whether it is skill training, whether it is critical minerals initiative or more?
I would agree with you. I think the Indian perception is that Global South is a major pole of friendship and cooperation for India, and that Africa is really central to the Global South, or it is the heart of Global South. And this whole architecture, in a way, was developed by India when shouldering on the responsibility of presidency of G20 during 22-23 period. Those two famous Voice of Global South summits were organized, and one was organized later. That really made even the phrase Global South much more current, and it went into the foreign policy lexicon of a lot of our countries. So that contribution by India and the Indian leadership is undoubtedly there. At the same time, I think I should be very candid, and while agreeing with Professor Pant about perhaps the Johannesburg summit surpassing the expectations, I should point out that some of us are concerned about the immediate future, that is what happens next year, because it is not just only about logistics and protocol, although that in itself is important. As we know, G20 runs on a troika basis, that is the previous presidency, the present presidency, and the next presidency. So now how will troika run if Washington and Pretoria don't even talk to each other? Will that be only run by US and UK? That is one question. The second, even more substantive question, and I'm saying just realistically and objectively, is that many of the central ideas in Johannesburg Leaders' Declaration may not be palatable to the US. Then what happens? As the president, will they try to set aside the overwhelming consensus by which the document has been passed? So some of these questions will bother the experts and diplomats, but maybe this is not the time to go too much into it, except to say that I'm sure the leaders in their pull-asides and in their private discussions have discussed in the past 3 days and hopefully developed a strategy as to how to navigate and carry forward G20 through 2026 when US will be chairing it, it will be a very significant aspect for us to watch if we really want to take a comprehensive and objective view of this forum.
Right. Professor Harshvardhan Pant, if I can bring that to you, absence of President Trump, who chose to boycott or whatever his stand was, the absence of United States, in many ways is also the elephant in the room as far as conversation on the G20 is concerned. What Ambassador Bhatia mentioned about whether it's a direct spat with South Africa, or whether it is President Trump's own concerns around organized multilateralism, how does it shape, impact the character of a G20, from technical questions about who takes the gavel to the manner in which whatever has been achieved in the past 4 editions of the G20 with the focus on the global south, what happens next? How do you look at these questions that does leave one concerned?
Yes, I think there is a fair degree of concern around that, but I think that concern is not primarily situated around G20. That's a concern that
Sure.
that the wider multilateral order concerns that look, under Trump administration, under his vision, under his administration's vision, multilateralism is not really the central, a feature of diplomacy. Bilateral transactionalism seems to have become the norm. And he favors bilateral transactions, he favors bilateral engagements, he favors bilateral outcomes. So clearly, what we are witnessing in Washington is a redefinition of their policy priorities. So there is no doubt that is also going to shape the agenda of their G20, and many of the proposals that have been now put forth repeatedly by successive presidencies from Indonesia onwards to South Africa, 4 developing country presidencies that came through, and that made, I think, G20 in some ways once again relevant to the needs of our times. There is a danger that we may lose that momentum, and then that danger exists. One can look at it primarily through the G20 lens, but also one has to look at it through the lens of multilateralism. After all, we do not see the same force and the same impact being put there. Now, I think that allows, in a certain way, middle power coalitions to emerge, middle power diplomacy to emerge, because we have also seen that this time the absence of Xi Jinping from G20.
Right.
Now, the 2 big powers are not interested. If the 2 big powers are signaling that they are going to go ahead with greater bilateral engagements, not only between themselves, but also with other actors, then I think the global multilateral order will have to be rethought. And can middle powers do their bit in re-energizing, reinventing, the G20 mechanism, perhaps also the wider global multilateral order. And it is interesting that UK was present here. UK will be one of the Troika members, and how UK responds to this. And we know that UK is very, very keen on greater engagement with the developing world. Their foreign policy talks a lot about it, but they are also under pressure with Mr. Trump. So how far can you balance the pressures that all nations are facing bilaterally and multilaterally? The two are not converging anymore. And I think that's a challenge that will be there for all the actors, key actors, including India. And I think, therefore, what India has proposed, and if India can keep that momentum alive, it will go a long way in signaling to the world that India remains committed to the wider aspirations of the global south, and it wants to continue to see G20 do its bit. Whether or not America plays ball, in this particular domain, that we will have to wait and watch. But obviously, at the moment, things do not look very bright from that perspective, and I think, therefore, alternative strategies will have to be thought out. And how can not only G20 but wider global multilateralism can be sustained? I think that's a question across domains that is being asked. We have seen what happened at COP, also.
Yes.
So we are looking at wider, at an analytical level. It's a broader question, and I think American foreign policy has to answer some of that. But I think others also have to answer some of that.
Okay, let's go across live to Johannesburg, South Africa once again. My colleague Amritpal Singh continues to report from the venue. Amrit, if we talk about India's role in the G20, the manner in which Prime Minister Modi's initiatives that he proposed, and about 6 initiatives that he proposed at the G20 Johannesburg, many of them also appear to be reflected in the final declaration by the leaders. Could you give us a sense of how those interventions were received by the G20 leadership? When Prime Minister really brings in the civilizational values to modern USPs that India brings in.
That's right. In his interventions yesterday, the Prime Minister gave 6 proposals, proposed 6 initiatives, and they were received well. Say, for example, skill training for the African continent and having certified trainers, 1 million certified trainers over the next decade, or the emergency response and healthcare mechanism that he proposed, or the open, the satellite data sharing that he proposed, or the nexus between fighting the nexus between drugs and terrorism. So clearly there was a general sense of agreement on what he had proposed, and it was received well because the approach essentially was that revisiting how development is viewed. In fact, during his session, during his intervention today, a little while back, in a session called in a session on critical minerals, decent work in artificial intelligence, the Prime Minister advocated the need for a fundamental change in the way critical technologies are approached and promoted. He called for these technology applications to be human-centric and not finance-centric. And he said, it should be more open source than exclusive models, or they should be more, based on global in approach rather than national in approach or parochial in approach. He said that AI also must translate for the good of the people, and he called for a global compact on principles of transparency, human oversight, safety by design and prevention of misuse of AI. Clearly, and one more last thing, if I can tell you, speaking on talent mobility, he said because decent work was a part of that session, it was about providing equal opportunities to people around the world, not based on their nationalities, not restricting the choices based on their nationalities or where they come from. So the Prime Minister noted the progress made in talent mobility at New Delhi summit of G20, and he said that the group should develop a global framework for talent mobility in the coming years. So this is, these kind of things is something which everybody agrees to in principle. Finally, they may not, it may not translate down to what is said here because, say the outcomes of the G20 are not binding on the member states who are present here or approve of them. It's often seen, and that's in the nature of multilateral groupings, Shubhendu. It's not exclusive to G20. We've often seen nations make commitments and then fall short of it, be it on climate change, be it on climate financing, be it on sustainable development goals, etc. But in principle, there is an agreement. And one major thing, in fact, if I can ask my camera person to just zoom and show you, this is the closing session of the G20 Johannesburg summit is going on. President Cyril Ramaphosa is addressing with world leaders in attendance. So what Cyril Ramaphosa is also saying is that what the Johannesburg summit has been able to achieve is that they've been able to keep a continuity when it comes to developmental priorities, especially of the have-nots of the world, especially of those who have been left behind, and there is a commitment to take all along and bring in fundamental changes in terms of reform of multilateral institutions, banking institutions, multilateral banking institutions, the questions of debt vulnerability, etc. Now, all these issues are issues which impact the global south and more than anybody else, and also our shared concerns about, say, climate change or arresting climate change and financing. At least they've been able to put a quantifiable number. Whether they are able to achieve that or not is remains to be seen. But there is a certain in principle agreement on the way we are moving forward. So that is the general sense here at the Johannesburg summit. But then also what Ambassador Bhatia and Professor Pant were raising, this question also lingers that once the presidency goes back to the global north, especially the United States led by President Trump, will it see reversal of what was achieved over the past 4 years, or the consensus built over the past few years? One would see a reversal of that, given the fact that Donald Trump doesn't care much for multilateralism or multilateral institutions, and likes his way of coercive diplomacy, whether through trade, tariffs, or just not coming down to, say, South Africa to participate in it, because he perceives there is a anti-white government, and there is a which may not be actually the situation on ground. His perceptions may be different at what is actually transpiring in South Africa. So that question remains, but yes, there is an in-principle consensus on the issues that were reflected in the outcome document and what I spoke about. Shubhendu.
Okay, Amrit, as telling us that the Leaders Summit appears to be in its final leg, I'm curious to quickly ask you, how will that technicality of it, how will that transfer of the presidency from the global south to the global north take place? What happens to the gavel, that very historic moment that we witnessed every year when the gavel is passed on from one president to another? Do we know what is going to happen next as far as the transfer is concerned?
The short answer to that is I don't know. We will know. I'll ask Mohit, my camera person, to just pan around and show. I'm at the media center. All eyes are on that conference. Right. You see journalists sitting here looking, because everybody is wanting to know how will it transpire, and nobody really knows the answer to that. That will transpire in a few moments now. So everybody is very keenly watching, and that's the question that has been asked here for the past 2 days, that how do they actually transfer it? The presidency will go to the United States. Just the protocol of it, just the very act of it, and the symbolism of it is what remains to be seen. Whether he will do it to an empty chair, whether he would just not do it, it will be assumed that the presidency has got transferred. We'll get to know as it plays out.
Suspense is never a bad idea. Amrit, stay with us. We'll continue our conversation with you. Ambassador Rajiv Bhatia, if we return to the initiatives that Amrit was listing, the initiatives that Prime Minister proposed, and then they were also later reflected in the Leaders' Declaration. From your experience of having served in Africa, sir, how well do you see has India articulated the key requirements, challenges facing the global south, particularly Africa, in the context of the Africa Skills Multiplier program that Prime Minister proposed, the idea of training the trainers, of having about 1 million trainers in a decade? The
articulation is flawless. We have a good finger on the, on African pulse. We know exactly what is required. And so we are able to put forward ideas with great brevity and with great concise manner, and point out what is to be done. The challenge really comes is when the implementation is planned. Now, since you mentioned about the 1 million trainers under the G20 initiative, we still have to look closely as to how many of these ideas have actually specifically, in so many words, found their place in the Leaders' Declaration. Because as you know, right, Leaders' Declaration is the outcome of the deliberations for the past 12 months. And right towards the end, the ministers and the Prime Minister and President, they give their consent, and so it goes out.
So we'll go across to Amrit Pal Singh, our colleague. He has something important to share with us. Amrit, sure, over to you. Amrit Pal continues to be with
Cyril
us.
Ramaphosa Yes, Shubhendu, I am with you if you can hear me. That is the closing ceremony. The President of South Africa, Cyril Ramaphosa, just put the gavel down, and he said the next presidency goes on to the United States. Got up, he's meeting world leaders, President Lula coming to congratulate him, other leaders coming to congratulate him. But he said he just put the gavel on the desk, and he said the presidency now passes on to the United States of America, and we will see you there next year. So effectively, he's passed on the presidency. We can see Prime Minister Modi walking up to meet President Cyril Ramaphosa and congratulate him on the successful completion of his presidency. President Lula and Prime Minister Modi hugging each other. Prime Minister Modi now waiting to congratulate Cyril Ramaphosa. The two leaders shaking hands at the closing ceremony. The Prime Minister conveying his congratulations, and the two leaders hugging him. A warm embrace. Dr. Jaishankar, the External Affairs Minister, is also, we can see him in the backdrop. Clearly, world leaders now congratulating President Cyril Ramaphosa for a successful completion of the G20 presidency this year. So, while he was putting the gavel down on the desk, he said the presidency now passes on to the United States of America, and that's where we all shall meet next year. Miami, if I understand, is where the US will be hosting the next G20. So Cyril Ramaphosa has formally passed on the presidency to the United States, even while the representative of the United States wasn't here.
Right, historic moment there, the conclusion of the G20. Our correspondent Amritpal Singh getting us those visuals. Ambassador Bhatia, before I come back to the previous question, just your quick comment on what we just witnessed. The gavel kept on the table. The scenes are a bit odd and unprecedented, I believe. But what options did Cyril Ramaphosa have? And now the presidency goes to America.
Thank you. In fact, I'm grateful that you raised that issue. I was about to comment even earlier. My point essentially was that we all noticed after the president put the gavel there, for a while, President Lula picked it up. And then President Ramaphosa again put it back on the table. I think, there is a symbolic thing here. It does show, a kind of a fissure within G20, where the world's largest economy and the most important power in the world is getting the presidency of a forum where it is not present. In terms of pure protocol, most likely I can hazard the guess that the chief of protocol of South Africa will invite the Shahid Affair of the US in Pretoria Embassy to come and take the gavel and send it to Washington. Maybe Shahid Affair will fly to Washington to hand it over to the White House. But be that as it may, it does, create those worries in our minds because we have to remember that it should not go beyond this. There was even a hint earlier from Washington that South Africa should not even be a member of G20. I hope they do not mean it. It was just a comment which hopefully will be forgotten, so that the unity and the effectiveness and credibility of G20 remains. My other point on this very issue is that you noticed very importantly, our Prime Minister had meetings with the Prime Minister of UK and Prime Minister of South Korea. In my reckoning, these two countries will now play a very, very important role because they are the chairs or the presidents after the US. So in a way, I think India is already beginning to look at the medium-term future of G20. So that is something that we need to note. Back to the point I was making, essentially is that the articulation by India was flawless. Those 6 points, they are very easy to comprehend. It's very easy for media to report them. It's also very easy for think tank and academics to pick them up and extrapolate them. But the proof of the pudding will lie in eating. And I would, certainly give importance to all 6 of them. But this one, based on, since you asked my experience in Africa, I think if G20 can come anywhere near 1 million trainers to be trained in the next 5 years or so, this can be dramatic, but it would require an action plan. It would require additional financial resources. It would require a mechanism to follow it up. And it would require a very clear acceptance. I mean, will, for example, the US, UK, South Korea accept this and push it with India's help? That would be the criteria. And frankly, we don't know the answer at this stage. We hope progress will be ensured, but we will have to wait and see.
Right. Professor Harsh Pant, if I can come to you, sir. How do you interpret those visuals so rich in symbolism, the conclusion of the G20 summit, between aspirations for continuity to the difference that really now plays out in the open? There's no one to take the gavel at the moment. Where does G20 go from here?
I think one thing that we can certainly credit Mr. Trump with is that he has put diplomacy aside, and he creates these optics which speak for themselves. Whether you like them or not, this is the reality that we are all nations are navigating. That we have the leader of the most important country in the world. His administration is not interested in certain aspects of the global order, and multilateralism is one of them. And I think the way this transition has happened from South Africa to the US, I hope that it remains primarily an issue of optics at this point, and it is from here on we can see some degree of engagement, because a year is a long time, in international politics. If the agenda that so assiduously has been built over the last 4 presidencies gets marginalized at a time when it is most needed, at a time when fragmentation is so high, at a time when polarization is so high, when institutional global institutions are collapsing, and I think G20 has been able to, in some way, create this sense that this platform can work to some degree. It would be really difficult to resurrect it if the agenda gets marginalized, and if there is no leadership, because expecting leadership from Washington at this point in time on some of these issues is largely redundant, because we know that it is not going to happen. So what can other nations do to create a semblance of continuity in that agenda? Maybe taking it on themselves with a group of like-minded countries to pursue that agenda, because that I think ultimately will have to be the response. We know Mr. Trump is very transparent in the way he conducts his diplomacy. So clearly, he has given enough indications that he has no interest and he has no inclination to pursue this matter. So hopefully, there'll be enough joint leadership, combined leadership in the kitty of G20 to take this agenda forward. But I don't think that one can rely on the US at this point to take this particular set of conversation forward and to take this particular agenda forward, and in particular because he goes ahead with he has a very personalized type of diplomacy, and it takes very personalized diplomacy. So he doesn't like, for some reason, for various reasons that he has said, that he doesn't like the present South African administration. So I think that personalized element would also mean that any degree of continuity would not be there. So I do think that this is the symbolism of the gavel not passing officially to the US, and the way the handover happened perhaps also reflects a larger turbulence in the G20 that we may see over the course of the next year.
Professor Pant, just want to stay on this idea a little longer. Beyond the optics of the gavel, it is one thing to not participate in a larger gathering of the G20 leaders. It's quite another to be able to lead such a grouping that you earlier refused to participate in. What are the expectations from America's leadership of the G20? We talked about the participation, but what about the leadership? When the gavel lands in the hands of President Trump, what can we expect then?
I think, I mean, see, as an analyst, I would say it would be very fascinating as to observe, the agenda that the G20 has laid out, which is in stark contrast to the agenda in some ways on issues like climate change, for example, that Mr. Trump is laying out. A lot of these issues that G20 is laying out is about countries pooling resources to work together on certain domains. Mr. Trump's agenda seems to be very bilateral, very transactional. What does it, what does it mean for America? Perhaps what does it mean for America in the short term? And I think a lot of these questions would be fascinating to observe in terms of how a Trump administration configures the G20 agenda, because a lot of the issues will remain on the table, but whether the means through which they pursue these ends change, I think that would be that would certainly be very interesting to observe. Now, one of the things that we have seen, for example, that in other multilateral situations and multilateral frameworks as well, Mr. Trump and his administration has not signaled a great degree of engagement. So my own sense would be that we will see a very superficial engagement by Washington on many of these issues throughout the year. And if at all a summit happens, it would be very perfunctory sort of a summit where, again, the focus would be on bilateral engagements, not on the way perhaps we have seen the struggles of Indonesia, India, Brazil, and South Africa to bring together a world that is divided, deeply divided, and to become a bridge between the developed and the developing world. I think it will be a very new way of approaching G20 by the Trump administration, if at all they do pursue that. But so I think you are right that it is one thing not to be present here. It is another thing to think of what do you do from now on when, whether you like it or not, the G20 presidency is with you, and whether you like it or not, you have to do something with it. Now, what is that something? I think we will all be looking forward very carefully. But I think the most serious issue would be whether the G20 gets sidetracked and whether it gets consumed by American approach, negative approach to multilateralism, because that would mean a loss of a year at a time when I don't think the global order can afford ignoring the concerns that have been put by the G20 over the last few years on the table. So it would be interesting, but I think it would also be very, very concerning at a number of levels, what has happened and what is likely to happen.
Right. Ambassador Bhatia, what would be your concerns and expectations from America's, President Trump's leadership, presidency of the G20?
Well, if you ask this question to serving diplomats in India, they probably will not answer you at all, for good diplomatic reasons. But I'm no longer in the government, and I'm trying to understand and assist in understanding the situation here. And at the same time, we don't want to be speculative. I think
Sure.
This is not the time, this is not the evening when we should be speculative in a negative manner. But I would say that the choices before the US administration are such that, they really will need to re-understand and re-study the significance of G20 and its history. And if they were to do that, they would realize that G20 is actually their creation. G20 was in operation from 1999 to 2007 at the finance minister's level as a result of a long series of endeavors by G7, the countries of the North. But its elevation to the highest political level was done at the initiative of the US president. So in a way, US president and the US administration can be regarded as a father which created G20 summit. There is no doubt on that. And therefore, Washington will need to take this very importantly. I would also say, I think we should watch 3 bilateral relationships in the next 2-3 months. India-US,
Right.
Because we all know that this relationship has come under stress We keep hearing optimistic noises that this is about to be resolved, the trade dispute and the rest of the other issues. If that were to happen, then prospects of G20 would immediately improve, because India's ability and role to play as the bridge between the South and North would improve vastly. The second, Brazil-US relationship, the prospects have already improved somewhat after the meeting between President Lula and President Trump in Malaysia. We have to watch how the follow-up is done, whether that can be. And of course, the third, the most crucial, is the US-South Africa relationship, which really touched a nadir last year and now. But can this be turned around? Because, both sides, American scholars and South African scholars, must try to figure out as to what is the fundamental cause. Because I remember, since you asked my lived in experience, when I was High Commissioner in Pretoria, the US was for a very, very long time a very influential player in South Africa. And US-South Africa relations have always been consistently good. US presidents have had great respect for the first president of South Africa, Nelson Mandela, second president, Thabo Mbeki, and so on. So my short point is Washington will do some serious introspection. And I have no doubt that the G20 leaders, minus President Trump, have already done some introspection in Johannesburg, even though we may not be privy to it. And my second essential point is that these three bilateral relationships will need to be studied in order to understand as to how G20 may unfold and showcase itself in the coming year, 2026.
Professor Pant, if I may divert a little, vis-a-vis the COP30 that you referred to earlier, we've seen the outcome, the manner in which it's seen as one of the most divisive climate congregation in the past 3 decades. No timeline to eliminate fossil fuels. So the point is that the expectations that one had from the climate summit, many of them have not been met. Should we be reading this against the outcome of the G20 as well, in terms of aspirations and what happens in real politics?
Yes, I think perhaps we are at an inflection point in the way we need to think about the global multilateral order. I don't think the older assumptions hold at all in the present under the present circumstances. And if you don't have a leadership, if you don't have enough investments diplomatic investment that is being made in the processes, then I think some of these outcomes perhaps will happen more and more. Because look, we are living in a world today where UN Security Council seems to be not functioning at all. We are living in a world where, despite conflicts raging, we have not heard global institutions take up their responsibility seriously. Despite the economic crisis that a large part of the world is going through, we have not seen global economic institutions talk about them. WTO has almost collapsed, not working at all. We have seen what happened to WHO during COVID, and we are looking at the platforms like G20 getting which at one point provided a lot of ballast to global discussions, global multilateral discussions, today seem to be embroiled within the problems that America is going through. So in some ways, this is a moment where, if you have the top leader, in some ways the most important country, missing in action, you also see other stakeholders look at this process through very narrow lens. And I think that's what seems to be happening more and more. I mean, there are certainly very good reasons why COP30 agenda is divisive, and where certain kinds of voices were raised, whether it was fossil fuel agenda, climate finance, how much support should the developing world get from the developed world. I think all those issues are very relevant, but because there was no leadership, because there was a lot of fragmentation, we saw how divisive this COP became, and there is no optimism in sight that this will rectify itself going forward. Although we know how climate change is becoming more and more of an issue, we also know that particularly in the developed world today, given the economic challenges that the developed world is facing, the developed countries are facing, the West is facing in particular, we are seeing the leadership in these countries taking a step back from their own commitments. And therefore, the pressure is now that developing countries should be doing much more, which is clearly straying away from the mandate that the previous COPs had been laying out. So despite challenges, we had seen in the past countries coming to terms with their differences, converging, providing a reasonable solution, reasonable declaration, reasonable outcomes, which is becoming more and more difficult in present circumstances. So I do think that we will see more of this happen. We will see continued disinvestment by America in a lot of these platforms. And as Ambassador was saying, this is many of these platforms, many of these institutional frameworks are the creations of Americans themselves. But the Trump administration has a view that is very disruptive of the order that Americans themselves have created. So we are almost at a point where many of these, if the present trends continue for the next 3 years as well, we will be in a very different world from an institutional perspective. And I think that means that countries like India will have to lead and do much more in creating that space for global conversations that is becoming more and more difficult to sustain.
Ambassador Rajiv Bhatia, the reason why I brought up COP30 was also, if we were to look at the leaders' declaration, and I'm quoting from it, one of the tenets is about mobilizing finance for, it calls it just energy transition. Inequalities it recognizes as is pervasive in the current energy landscape of the world. 600 million Africans, beg your pardon, have no access to electricity. There is absence of clean cooking fuels for millions of them. It envisions tripling renewable energy capacity of the world. Financing sustainably this energy but where is the money going to come from? The reality of it was supposed to, the Bellum was supposed to, in a way, show us what Johannesburg hopes to achieve.
Well, you are asking very honest and very direct questions, and I think they deserve a clear response. The issue is already fairly dated. Where is the money going to come from? In fact, on the money, the climate finance itself, we can notice that during India's presidency, this famous phrase was adopted saying that developing countries' need for climate change, adaptation, etc., for transition to renewable energy, not billions but trillions of dollars. This phrase, I think, continued with Brazil, and it has figured again, as you rightly pointed out, in the Johannesburg Leaders' Declaration. Clearly, if the biggest economy of the world says that there is no environmental crisis, and therefore there is no need for climate change or any strategies that deal with climate change that will bring a catastrophe to the world, surely the money is not going to come from the US. Now, if that happens, then the other members of G7, what will they do? That is the central question. But at the same time, I also want to be very realistic. I think a large part of the world is convinced that there is a climate emergency situation that is developing, that climate change is a reality. And therefore, all these concepts that we are talking about, climate justice, climate finance, climate action, all these are valid concepts. And therefore, to answer your question where the money would come, it will have to come from the countries that are affected. This idea that while we need all the changes, but money must come from the north, it was a very good idea if it worked. Unfortunately, it is not working. And hence, I think India certainly is a country which is not sitting and waiting for foreign euros and dollars to arrive. India is doing its own thing. India is convinced that we have to be ready for a just transition, and we will continue to push the larger case of the global south. But that doesn't mean that India will give up on acting on this agenda domestically or helping the other partners and other countries to the extent it is in its capacity to do so. That is how I'm looking at it. I'm worried about this. I'm realistic about it, but I do know that at some stage there will have to be a kind of a correlation between what is figuring in Johannesburg Declaration and the reality on the ground.
Right. Professor Pant, would you like to add to the greater role that you envisage for India, especially as far as the energy transition landscape is concerned, from both navigating its own national interest, it has this 2070 carbon neutrality target, to the leadership that it can play in this domain?
I think India has provided a very unique model of leadership. Because clearly, for a very long time, this developed and developing divide that had infected the debate, that used to be the central frame of reference for India as well. But what we have seen over the last decade is India really transforming its views, transforming its policies, transforming the policy landscape, and therefore, achieving some of these targets, for example, on renewables, much earlier than planned. And I think in some ways that is the spirit.
Professor Pant, we'll stop you for a moment. We're getting some visuals now from Johannesburg, South Africa. Here in the visuals, Prime Minister Narendra Modi is meeting the Prime Minister of Japan, Sanae Takaichi, the new Prime Minister, leader of Japan, having a talk with Prime Minister Modi. Several key bilateral engagements are taking place on the sidelines of the G20 summit. Here in the visuals, a short while ago, Prime Minister Narendra Modi met the Prime Minister of Japan, Sanae Takaichi. Prime Minister Takaichi took over the leadership of Japan just a few weeks ago, and here in Johannesburg, representing Japan at the G20. These visuals are of the bilateral meet between Prime Minister Modi and Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi of Japan. The discussions are expected to focus on advancing India-Japan special strategic and global partnership. India and Japan share close ties, common issues of interest from economic security, defense cooperation to facilitating talent mobility. Talent mobility in particular in focus in the recent visit of Prime Minister Modi to Tokyo, Japan. Here in the visuals, Prime Minister Narendra Modi in a bilateral meet with Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi of Japan. Several issues of common interest in focus, strengthening ties to promote peace, stability, and prosperity in the Indo-Pacific. Ambassador Bhatia, you've been highlighting the significance of these meetings that happen on the sidelines as well. We just looked at some visuals of Prime Minister Modi meeting Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi. I think this is the first formal meet between the two Prime Ministers after Prime Minister Takaichi took over the leadership. How do you see the significance of this particular meeting?
I would like first to make a broad point in terms of the benefit of this high octave summit diplomacy. And I think our viewers may like particularly to know that when a Prime Minister goes to a forum like this and meets a cross-section of world leaders, this is an advantage, a gain by itself. Never mind what is being discussed and what is being agreed. But in a flat matter of 2 or 3 days, Prime Minister Modi has met all the important leaders of the world except one who is not present there. And this, in a way, compensates for many, many visits he may have had to make otherwise. Now, take this example of Japan that you've asked. Our Prime Minister went to Japan. There was a very successful visit, so very substantive agreements signed and announced. And then in a few days, the Japanese Prime Minister was changed. So now, there was a bit of uncertainty. A new PM is there. How will, we go forward? Johannesburg comes in and hands over a golden opportunity for a very early meeting in the tenure of the new Japanese Prime Minister. And this meeting takes place. I feel very happy that it has taken place. It most probably would have confirmed the understandings and agreements which were reached in Tokyo just a few weeks back. And on top of that, there is another angle. In November, India was to host the Quad summit. And for that, Madame Sane Takechi would have come. But that was not possible. By meeting her, obviously the two leaders have got an opportunity to decide what to do with the Quad immediate future, just as they would have done yesterday when Mr. Modi and the Australian Prime Minister met. So I feel, as a student of diplomacy, I need to underline that the value of a summit like this should not be judged only by the speeches and declarations, but by the rich opportunity it gives to our leaders to save time and thousands of air miles by simply coming under one roof for 2 or 3 days to exchange views on the global challenges.
That's a very important insight, Ambassador Bharti. And just to take it forward, the point that you've been stressing about, the smaller multilateral engagements that are also taking place in the larger ecosystem of the G20. If I may mention, the Australia, Canada, India engagement in the domain of tech innovation, focusing on emerging technology. It's called New Trilateral Tech and Innovation Partnership. There is also IBSA. The expectations, one was wondering what shape, what kind of road forward will the grouping of India, Brazil and South Africa take? How do you see these smaller meetings also holding greater importance and value?
Indeed, I think they are also of immense practical value, and I'm very happy you have focused on these two trilaterals. I will speak briefly, and I'm sure my dear friend Harsh as well would probably, express his views on it. I think in these two trilaterals, India is the common factor, and that shows the potential of India's being a bridge between the North and the South. In one trilateral that involves Canada and Australia, in a way, we are dealing on, the cutting edge technology, the emerging technologies, the critical minerals, AI and the rest of it. And already the government has been able to produce a brief but very crisp, trilateral statement pointing out as to what will be the parameters for this cooperation and directing their officials to meet early next year in order to develop a blueprint for the vision that the leaders have. So this is something very significant. On the other hand, IBSA is also significant. I think even though it lost some of its edge because of the emergence and development of BRICS, the other larger forum, but it is important that India, South Africa and Brazil have kept IBSA alive even at the summit level. I think right in the full global media glare of publicity, they are making a point that IBSA is alive and kicking. And this is important from several points of view. I think, first of all, unlike BRICS, this is a forum of democracies from 3 different continents of 3 large economies. And they have many things in common. They even have a fund. They have a financial resource to help the developing countries as well. It can develop into a bigger thing as and when the leaders agree on this. But I'm happy that this has taken place, and it has one more value, and this is where I would end this intervention, and it is that IPSA can enable these three member states, India, South Africa, Brazil, to effect a measured balance within BRICS. BRICS was earlier 5 countries, now it has become 11 countries, and we know that within BRICS, sometimes 1 or 2 countries, work rather closely. But that can be, addressed if these 3 countries, India, Brazil, South Africa, deepen their own mutual understanding and cooperation, and then play a bigger role in BRICS. So from all points of view, this was a very good initiative, and we look forward to some productive results.
Ambassador Bhatia, just to understand the technicality of it, do you also see it as a sort of way forward for multilateral engagements to succeed in the future, where we see that a bigger multilateral organization has to suffer different kinds of pressures that sort of impacts the speed, the efficiency at which it can work? And here we're talking about more like-minded, the democracies, the growing economies working together. Their ability to sort of converge their strengths is going to be better. Would you say that?
I would agree with you. I think we can look at this at 3 levels, and the first is the multilateral level. The purists would say multilateral is, the UN, WTO, fora where everybody is a member in the world. Then you have plurilateral forum such as G20, where only a few countries are members, although, as I pointed out some time back, it is not just 19 countries. Now, G20 ends up representing close to 100 countries. If you take into account African Union being 55 countries and European Union being 27 countries. So it's already a plurilateral organization, but with a bigger global footprint. But if UN is not working, and if G20 is also very long on declarations and somewhat short on action, then we need to do something all by ourselves. And we have found that the smaller grouping, 3, 4, 5 countries sitting together, they can make a difference, at least to their own national interest, much more effectively than otherwise. So India is not choosing one over the other. India remains active at the UN. India remains in a leading position in G20. And India is continuously thinking and designing and executing even the smaller arrangements. So I would say, in short, India remains driven by the need for multipolarity and by its desire and impulse to strengthen its strategic autonomy and independence in foreign policy making.
Right. Here, let me also invite our next panelist, Ravi Joshi, visiting fellow with Observer Research Foundation, is joining us. Mr. Joshi, good evening and welcome. Your opening thoughts, sir. We learned from Johannesburg the G20 has concluded with those dramatic scenes vis-a-vis the gavel. But coming to the real agenda, what would you say has been achieved in this edition of the G20?
We are now faced with a situation where the global common challenges are becoming more and more critical, and the global platforms, like the multilateral platform, the biggest one, the United Nations, has failed to address or has failed to meet the challenges. And particularly, I would mention 3 or 4 major crises. One is the Russia-Ukraine war. The second is the Israeli massacre of Palestinians in Gaza. And then the climate crisis. Here we have a country that is the United States, which is one of the primary responsible countries for the disastrous climate crisis that we are facing today, is denying climate change. So the countries of the global south have no option but to unite under this plurilateral fora, as Ambassador Bhatia has said, that include almost 85% of the world's population and GDP. And there are more than 100 countries, if you include African Union and European Union. So this plurilateral organization becomes very important at this juncture when United Nations has failed. So now, talking about the present summit in South Africa, the points made by Prime Minister Modi on inclusive and sustainable growth and the 6 critical proposals he has made, which include, which address the global healthcare, global terror and drug menace, and also the necessity to share open data, open space and AI technologies, and and to make them equitable to the world and to decrease the digital divide. These are very important suggestions, and India is making a huge contribution to this global South platform and partnership.
Right. But Mr. Joshi, again, given the context in which this G20 gathering was unfolding, the pressures, the absence of America and President Trump, the points that have been talked about, the agreements that have been made, what about the sort of the roadmap ahead? How far is G20 empowered to achieve those targets? We've been also talking about how the presidency of the G20 goes to the United States. I mean, the power that is a subject of concern at the moment is going to be the power that will be leading the G20. What then happens to there's this very forward-looking pro-global South agenda that the G20 has been articulating for the past at least 4 editions?
Yes, that's a very important concern that everybody knows, that the elephant in the room is not only conspicuously absent, but is also a very stubborn challenge to all the aspirations that the G20 has put forward in its roadmap. For instance, let's take the one of the most critical points that they should, Prime Minister Modi has called for a fair and reasonable trade mechanism, trading mechanism. Okay. Now here we have a president in the White House who imposes 25% tariff on one country today, and next day he imposes 50% tariff. And so when the entire global system is held hostage to the whims and fancies of a president in the White House, it becomes impossible to even envisage a rule-based international order. And now in South Africa, they're calling for strengthening the WTO. The WTO is practically dead, and nobody goes to WTO these days. Everybody knows that you have to sort out at the bilateral level or at the multilateral level. You have to form a free trade arrangements. So that seems to be the order of the day. And there is one country which is absolutely running amok with all kinds of sanctions and tariffs on everybody else. So as you rightly say, that we are in a very unpredictable, unreliable world where the challenges are huge. And this kind of an aspirational goals that the Global South is envisaging are becoming increasingly difficult to implement. So let us see how it unfolds. I mean, I'm unable to see. In fact, the next presidency goes to the United States, the very country which is holding the international trading system, the global climate crisis, all these as hostage to its whims and fancies. So it's a very serious challenge.
Ambassador Bhatia, if we were to reflect on some of the outcomes mentioned in the leaders' declaration, I want to talk about the theme of debt sustainability for low-income countries, which particularly in the declaration also, it concerns Africa in particular. From your experience, your diagnosis of the problem and a certain framework that is being proposed, how do you read its efficacy? Because once again, it may seem simple, but all of this would require money coming in a more efficient manner. How do you see the diagnosis of the problem and the solution that has been proposed?
I think, while I'm not really an expert on the financial track of G20, I do have a broader picture based on a close study of the Johannesburg Leaders Declaration early in the morning today. And before that, I think when in September the finance ministers of G20 met, they had developed and issued a declaration on debt sustainability, which is what G20 leaders have endorsed. It comes out very clearly that there are countries in the world today who are spending more money paying their debts than on looking after the health and education and other essential requirements of their population. So unless and until you help them in some imaginative way, there is no way they can get out of the pit in which they find themselves. So here, obviously, the balance has to be struck right between the international banking institutions' ability to advance further credits, further loans, and at the same time, with regard to the actual capability of the developing countries and African countries in particular to repay. Besides, from the north, there is a continuous message that the time for advancing grants and loans is over. What we can do to help you is investment. And I would like to draw your attention to yet another paragraph where South Africa and Germany working together have renewed the old concept of the compact with Africa. This started with German presidency a few years back, ran for a while, then ran aground. But the two countries got together and have now tried to restart it, especially because a couple of African countries have joined the other African countries in terms of collaborating with the German approach. Again, there also, the central point is African countries, please reform your economies. And in lieu of that, or as a compensation, or as an exchange, or as our own liability and responsibility, we, the North, will start stepping up investment in your economies, in your industry, in your agriculture, etc. So let's be very clear. The debt's already taken. Practical solution is being found slowly, but the future really will have to be investment oriented and not credits and grants and things like that.
Mr. Joshi, same point I'm bringing to you. The idea of debt sustainability, whatever has been said in the declaration, it's also a commentary on the kind of model of debt servicing that has existed so far, particularly vis-a-vis one country which has been responsible for a lot of smaller countries collapsing under the weight of debt traps. So in that sense, this particular segment of debt sustainability sends out an important message to the world at large.
You have to see as to who are the major investors. Now, the major investors today is China is one of the most important investors in Africa, in so many countries, in infrastructure development, in industrial development, all that. And you see, and then the Chinese model of developing these economies basically that they provide investment almost on a non-refundable basis, but they gain resources in that country. They get to hold the land, the minerals, and other resources which are critical for their country's development. So these countries become hostage to the countries which are investing. So we must understand that the nature of inequality in the global inequality now, which is most acutely felt in Africa, is actually leading to countries becoming victims of this debt trap. And we have seen it with wherever China has invested, whether it is in Sri Lanka or it is our neighborhood like Maldives, these countries actually become hostage to Chinese investment and they lose their resources. So, and it is very difficult for a poor country to fight against the might of an economic giant like Africa, like China. So now they have to build different models of in linking up with those countries which can do development without getting them into debt trap. So either with Europe or with India, they have to build models of some kind of a sustainable development where both countries gain from trading with each other. Now, as Ambassador Bhatia said very truly, now the aid of the season for giving grants and aid is gone. That period is gone. So it only depends on trade, and everybody wants fair trading system. And fair trading system, as we are now seeing, has been held hostage to the whims of the president in the US. And every country is practically suffering from that. So we are in for a very difficult period of uncertain economic chaos in the nearby future. That's what I can see.
Ambassador Bhatia, Mr. Joshi made an interesting connect between the concept of debt traps and exploitation of resources. And therein, may I bring in the way in which the theme of critical minerals is being deliberated in the declaration. Harnessing of critical minerals for inclusive growth, sustainable development is what the declaration says. Just a couple of points I want to just quote from the declaration. Excuse me. One, that the producer countries, especially developing countries, don't get to access the benefits of the resources that they produce from the countries in a holistic manner. There is very limited opportunity for value addition, and therefore it talks about a certain G20 critical minerals framework. From you, sir, I'd like to understand, again in the context of Africa, which is also home to and produces such important minerals for the world.
Thank you. In fact, for the full disclosure, I'm really happy that Ravi Joshi is with me today. We both served in the Indian High Commission in Kenya at the same time, and we have seen this together in terms of how Africans feel about the misuse and exploitation and overexploitation of their resources. So what the Johannesburg Declaration is saying is to put forward the African perspective, and you can see the imprimatur of South Africa and other countries in this. They are making very simple point. Critical minerals are available only in certain parts of the world. Africa is probably the richest region for this. There is no dearth of rare earths there. The problem is they don't want to be mere exporters of raw material. They are all for mining in a proper, healthy, environmentally safe manner. They are all for initial processing and even intermediate processing on the African soil. And in the process, they want technology from the other countries so that it creates a new capability, it creates employment, it creates industrialization, and as a result of which Africa moves up on the development chain now. And so this is a point which India is in full sympathy. India has been trying to take some of the manufacturing to Africa. I think we know that this is making good sense. African entrepreneurs are good people, capable people, and particularly if, you know, what we were talking earlier, Prime Minister's proposed a G20 initiative for 1 million trainers in Africa could be realized, then this would be also very, very helpful because it would raise the level of capabilities. So, in effect, I would say, critical minerals is a larger subject. It is not just about a spat between the US and China. It is very much about the wealth that is hidden there in Africa, which can be used. But first, it will have to be for the benefit of Africans, and then naturally Africa's other partners, which are willing to collaborate and help Africa, would also benefit from this.
Right, and the G20 critical minerals framework, Mr. Joshi, echoes what Prime Minister had mentioned as one of the initiatives of critical minerals circularity initiative to be able to diversify the supply chains of critical minerals. How do you see the role going forward, the new models that emerge, which does not allow hegemony of one or two powers, new models emerging, more multilateral cooperation in this domain? What do you see the role for India in Africa and with Africa?
Thank you. Before I answer your point, I would like to fully reciprocate very warmly the sentiments expressed by my former ambassador, Raj. We worked together in Kenya for over 3 years. Now, coming to your point regarding critical mineral circularity, which is one of the important proposals out of the 6 proposals made by Prime Minister Modi. Now, who uses critical minerals? Who are the corporations in the world who needs these critical minerals and for what use? One is solar panels, the other is for all these electric cars, and even for iPhones and smartphones. So the corporations which are using them and for who are paying billions of dollars to get hold of these minerals are all in the global north, primarily concentrated in the US, and of course China to another substantial extent. Now, with such being the case, actually China has practically gained a huge mileage over the US in capturing the critical minerals of the world. Right from Africa to Chile, it has gotten hold of critical minerals, and it has also imposed a kind of sanctions that anybody who uses critical minerals in which China has any interest will be sanctioned, or for any third country. So this war is going to heat up in the next few years, and you can see what the US did in Ukraine. US did the same thing in Ukraine, and that as soon as President Trump came to power, one of the things that he first signed up with Ukraine was to get hold of the critical minerals of the US,